So I'll take it by this point, everybody has seen what they've been doing, or, well, what they did with Miku Expo 2024. And the fact that they went with a screen instead of the typical hologram. I know I'm a bit late to the party and talking about this, but it wasn't until recently, when I was going back through some of my older work, that I realized I've personally worked with both LCD screens and projections in the same show. The show being an outdoor show about a year ago called Terra Lumina. So I figured I'd try and give some of my input on the possibility on why they likely decided to go with screens this time around instead of the standard hologram. To create the hologram of Miku, basically, it's a very old technique called a ghost image, or Pepper's ghost. Instead of projecting directly level with the glass, it's instead at an angle, either the projector itself or the glasses, which allows the image, when it's being projected onto, to be caught and reflected by the glass, making it appear when it's not actually there. Here, let me show you. So this is basically the video quality I'm getting. I've got the glass at the 45-degree angle that you saw, and up above it I actually have my cell phone. I'm retro recording this off of an old cell phone, which is why the image isn't great. But it does look like she's just floating there. Like, she's okay, there's a double image. There was nothing I could really do about that, but you can tell she's there. Had I had the proper glass, it would probably be a perfectly clear image. So yeah, actually, give me 1 second. Let me modify a couple of things. Okay, so it's a little bit better now. I've rotated or like flipped a piece of glass to try to see if the other side would help. I've also upped the brightness of my phone a little bit, and now she looks like she's dancing on the stage. This is how they do it. It's just a ghost image, or well, a reflection of my screen, which is up there. I'll probably add an arrow to give you guys an idea on how they go about doing the Miku effect. It is really cool, and it doesn't really work when the lights are on. Let me show you with a little one right here. Or it does kind of still work. But Miku's in her little box. And I've got my little light I can show you. There's some fingerprints on the glass. But she's in her box, and that's just how it works. Using the reflection off of the angled piece of glass right here. It's actually right in the middle. And there you go. Now you can kind of see the edge of it right there. So yeah, it's not a true hologram because it doesn't have the rotation, but you can see her from a decent few angles. So if you want to get it so that she has her feet directly on the ground, yeah, make sure your device is like right on the edge. So this is my normal phone. This is what I'm recording on. Is one of my older ones, so I do apologize if the quality's not great, but yeah, I wanted to share this. I also would like to point out that on my screen that I'm recording on, it's actually more vibrantly colored than the reflection that I'm seeing in person. I don't know if there's a way I can actually show it, but she's very blue to me, whereas this is actually on my phone screen true to color, so it actually looks better on my phone than it does in person. So yeah, that's what it looks like to get it. Firstly, kudos to Creative SL to the video on how to make these. It was my reference for making mine. I'll link it below. Taking a reflective surface like this piece of acrylic here and holding it at a 45-degree angle to my phone screen, it makes the reflection have that 3D visual property to it when in reality it's only a 2D image. It's this property here that makes it so it isn't a true hologram, as a true hologram would be able to be seen without losing the 3D aspect. For those who might think that maybe these holograms are going out of style and that's why they went with the screen, I would like to point out that MiHoYo, the studio behind Honkai Star Rail and Genshin, recently showed that you don't gotta put a hologram on transparent material to have a successful image or show. In the recent Honkai Star Rail concert, they had a hologram of Kafka come on and play the violin as a projection on stage. Instead of going with fabric or glass for said projection, they opted to use a metal grate. It's almost cage-like in its appearance. Not once have I seen someone complain about it. They even had her larger than life, so she took up more of the projection space instead of having a ton of dead room around her. You can see that with the Miku of how much blank space there is just surrounding her. This is great for a large arena where that concert took place. Instead of having her at what would have been her normal height, which is about 170 centimeters or 5'7" for the Americans, given the orchestra around her and the size of the tiles on the grate, that projection is likely 7 to 8 feet tall. Not just that, but because she was being projected onto a semi-transparent, semi-translucent material, you could still see the video playing on the big screen behind her, without causing issues whatsoever with how viewable her projection was. It was a win-win in all books. This same concert, by the way, had water shooting out around stage. This cage is moving up and down on a fly system to clear the stage for on-stage performances, and all sorts of extra things that would have added to the difficulty of this performance. The Honkai Star Rail concert alone makes me wonder what happened with Miku Expo. Crunchyroll has the means of being able to put on a show, and to be quite honest with how finicky those screens can be, I can't imagine the price-wise there wasn't that big of a difference. My own personal experience is a little bit closer to what MiHoYo did than using glass like Miku Expo has done in the past. When it's in the dark and projections are lined up perfectly, the net or the grate, it almost disappears from view, allowing the audience to be fully captivated by the projected show. One thing to keep note of is that when you project onto a material in front, like we did for Terra Lumina or for the Honkai Star Rail concert, you will have some of the image that is cast onto whatever backdrop you had, keeping in mind to keep the stage clear or the area clear behind it. In Terra Lumina, we always made sure that there was either an empty field or an empty exhibit behind our projections. The Honkai Star Rail concert had this where it was just a big empty stage behind her, and that the box was actually more like a C-shape than a full, complete box. Miku Expo, design-wise, has always opted for using lasers and almost rave-type lighting. When you combine that with the giant screen on stage, you lose a lot of those stage effects. And it's not just the effects. The band almost completely disappears behind the screen and you can barely see them. When it was the Pain, you could see the band, the effects, the stage design behind the characters. This is why having it be a ghost image on a piece of glass always worked so well. Going back to the screens versus the glass for Miku Expo, I imagine one advantage to having the screens would be over the pane of glass would have made a significant difference because it could be broken down into smaller sections and put together at each location. This would make them easier to transport for each city on tour because the glass needed to be coated or tempered to have the best reflection, so if or when it does break, it's not a crack, but instead shatters into thousands of little pieces. For as much as it's safer to use, I imagine it's probably happened before on tour, and Crunchyroll wanted to avoid it happening again. Another thing to take note is that with the screens, the designers of the show would have more ability to adjust the brightness and contrast of the characters. One thing you may have noticed, even with the small sample I put together, is that you have to have the image be super bright to have it contrast and show well. Otherwise, it comes out dull and miscolored. This is definitely something Miku Expo has improved on over the years as the technology has gotten better and just projectors as a whole have improved. So between the screen likely being easier to transport, making them a bit cheaper, and that it had somewhat of better contrast, Crunchyroll likely saw all that together to make their decision. So instead of seeing it from the experience side like the fans do, Crunchyroll, being Crunchyroll, likely saw it from the business side and thought we would just be happy with having Miku Expo back, and we would accept the screens over time. As you can tell, from all of that online backlash, the community didn't. Now see, if you're wanting to try doing these projection mappings at home to try it out for yourself, basically any projector will work. However, when it does come to venues and arenas, like the big shows like Miku Expo or Terra Lumina, the show I worked on, those projectors weigh upwards of 100 pounds. I imagine smaller ones are used at Miku Expo and Magical Mirai, which are the other concerts that they do. They're on the smaller side, but still bigger than your everyday commercial type projectors. Unfortunately, in all my research, I couldn't actually find the specs for the projectors that they use in those shows. I have to give some thanks to Jade Animations and their video about going to Magical Mirai in Japan, as I would not have thought to include looking for promotional material for that particular concert. The reason I say this is because in the 2023 promotional video that they made, you can see how they do the projections. Instead of having the pane of glass on an angle like you would in a homemade box, is one way of putting it, the pane is completely vertical. The way you get the angle to catch is by having the multiple projectors be seated on the floor of the stage, pointed up at a 45-degree angle. You can see them every so often as the light catches them. I counted at least 3. I imagine there's probably a 4th as a backup, especially with live performances of this kind. Basically, it's reverse to the homemade ones that you can make, of those little hologram boxes. Glass is particular in the way that it is compared to other types of materials that you could project onto. When you have more of a solid surface, you can have the projector level with the material without much issues, say like a screen or the metal cage from Honkai Star Rail's concert. Even when you project onto a material that isn't solid in the traditional sense, like mist or smoke. You don't have to cast it directly on an angle, or, well, you can project directly onto it, like how Disney has it in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at their parks. You have to work with refractive indexes of glass when working with it, hence why the angle is so important. Casting the projection from behind it while being level makes it so you see that projection light, and it draws attention away from the show, especially if you're on a semi-translucent material like glass or the mist. Having it in front limits what angles it can be seen from. Both are effective for these types of concerts, and having the projectors on the ground and angled upwards. And hey, at least you don't gotta worry about talent dancing on stage. That all being said, I can see why, from a production standpoint, why Crunchyroll may have chosen to go with the screens. Though as a fan, I don't agree with it. Part of what makes those concerts so special is that the projection work for them. I'm hoping we see a return to the glass with Magical Mirai, which is in about a month from this upload. And that for the future of Miku Expos, we see the return of the glass holograms. But with that all being said, this is Backstage Science, signing off.